Trump has authorized covert CIA operations in Venezuela. The largest aircraft carrier in the world has also been moved into the U.S. Southcom area. Of course, the Caribbean is going to be worth watching closely in the coming weeks.
New information coming out of Washington paints a far more complex picture of the United States' evolving approach toward Venezuela, and officials are now saying that what we're seeing is not a routine adjustment but a significant redirection of strategy. Behind closed doors, U.S. agencies have been coordinating a multi-layered response intended to reshape the geopolitical environment surrounding Venezuela, and the first indicators of that shift are now becoming visible in briefings, diplomatic exchanges, and movements across regional networks. This elevation in posture follows months of rising uncertainty across South America, where political fractures, economic instability, and shifting alliances have created conditions that American officials describe as increasingly unpredictable. Analysts inside the government have warned repeatedly that Venezuela's internal pressures are reaching levels that could create broader regional spillover effects, and those warnings appear to have accelerated Washington's pace. What's notable is how this new phase is being approached not through a single channel but through a combination of intelligence operations, financial monitoring, strategic partnerships, and a renewed presence in areas that the U.S. views as vital for regional stability. Officials familiar with the matter say the intent is to prevent sudden destabilizing events that could catch allies unprepared or allow rival powers to expand their influence unchecked. This marks a departure from the more reactive posture that defined earlier U.S.-Venezuela interactions, signaling a belief that passive observation is no longer sufficient. For months, senior officials have been tracking emerging networks that span beyond Venezuela's borders, networks tied to fuel movement, cross-border financing, political intelligence, and communication channels that support high-level actors inside the country. These networks have raised flags inside multiple U.S. agencies, prompting a reevaluation of both the risks and the opportunities in the region. The U.S. is now leaning on its partnerships across the Caribbean and Latin America to tighten information sharing and strengthen oversight of activity that may influence regional security dynamics or economic pathways that affect American interests. This shift also reflects a global environment where traditional alliances and lines of influence are shifting rapidly. Venezuela has intensified relationships with several non-Western actors, and U.S. analysts view these developments as part of a larger pattern of strategic recalibration around the world. That pattern includes new energy alliances, expanded military dialogues, and a broad effort by outside powers to carve out stronger positions in regions where American influence has traditionally been dominant. Washington's new phase of operations is, in many ways, a direct response to that growing competition. As this recalibrated strategy unfolds, officials acknowledge privately that the stakes are high. The U.S. wants to prevent any major geopolitical surprise, especially at a time when global supply chains, energy markets, and diplomatic alignments are already under pressure. Venezuela's role in these interconnected systems is often underestimated, but inside strategic briefings, it has resurfaced as a focal point, an area where sudden developments could ripple outward faster than policymakers can react. The new phase of operations is designed to ensure that those developments are monitored, understood, and countered before they create larger disruptions. Inside several federal agencies, analysts have been piecing together a pattern of developments that point to a more coordinated level of activity in and around Venezuela than what had been visible in previous months. These assessments include satellite observations, maritime tracking, financial flows, diplomatic movements, and shifting communication patterns among actors with direct ties to Caracas. Officials have noted unusual increases in logistical coordination across certain border regions and waterways that are routinely monitored for strategic indicators. While none of these developments alone raised alarms, the combined momentum of these signals triggered a heightened internal review that eventually led to the operational shift now being confirmed. One factor driving this renewed attention is the growing pressure on regional migration routes. Movement out of Venezuela has surged again as economic volatility and political uncertainty deepen, creating complex humanitarian and security dynamics that neighboring countries struggle to manage. U.S. policymakers are increasingly concerned that uncontrolled migration flows could become destabilizing if left unchecked, particularly when combined with reports of opportunistic networks exploiting migrants for financial gain. These networks, often operating in the shadows, have become more sophisticated and interconnected, prompting a need for sharper intelligence and more structured oversight. Beyond the humanitarian angle, there is a strategic dimension tied to energy markets and resource leverage. Venezuela's oil sector, despite years of decline, remains a crucial piece in the global energy puzzle. Even minor shifts in production, partnerships, or export patterns can influence market expectations, especially during a period of heightened global uncertainty. Washington has been monitoring new conversations between Venezuela and external partners seeking deeper access to its energy reserves, viewing these moves as potential pathways for rival states to extend their footprint in the Americas. This aligns with a broader concern across U.S. security circles about rising competition for influence in strategic regions where the U.S. once held uncontested sway. Diplomatic backchannels have also become more active. Multiple sources confirm that high-level discussions between regional governments and international organizations have intensified, with a growing emphasis on stability mechanisms, sanctions frameworks, and contingency planning. Although these conversations are not being publicly detailed, they represent an effort to synchronize regional responses in a way that prevents unilateral actions that could escalate tensions. The U.S. is leaning heavily on these diplomatic networks to maintain situational awareness and ensure that major developments do not unfold without coordination. At the same time, internal Venezuelan dynamics are shifting in ways that heighten concern. Political alliances that once appeared rigid are showing signs of strain, and there are indications that several key actors are repositioning themselves in anticipation of possible changes in the balance of power. U.S. analysts are watching these shifts closely, not because they expect a sudden internal collapse, but because the pace of political maneuvering has accelerated at a moment when broader regional conditions are fragile. The U.S. does not want to be caught in a reactive stance if internal alignments trigger rapid changes that influence border security, refugee flows, or strategic cooperation with external actors. Taken together, these developments have reinforced the urgency behind the updated operational phase. The U.S. is seeking to ensure that it has the intelligence capacity, diplomatic reach, and strategic readiness to address any scenario that emerges from Venezuela's evolving landscape. This approach reflects a recognition that regional stability is deeply interconnected and that disruptions in one area can move quickly across borders, affecting everything from energy prices to security partnerships. Regional intelligence cooperation has expanded quietly in recent weeks, revealing how closely surrounding nations are now working with the United States to track developments connected to Venezuela's political and economic trajectory. Several governments have shared internal assessments that point to a rising level of uncertainty within their own borders as they brace for potential ripple effects. These ripple effects range from sudden shifts in migration intensity to fluctuations in cross-border trade routes, and increased movement of financial assets linked to entities operating inside Venezuela. For many of these countries, the concern isn't limited to political instability alone. It includes the broader implications of organized networks that adapt quickly when oversight structures weaken. Security analysts in multiple capitals have reported a noticeable uptick in cross-border logistical activity involving small aircraft, maritime vessels, and land routes traditionally associated with high-risk trafficking corridors. While not all of this activity is directly tied to Venezuela, the timing and concentration of these movements have drawn heightened scrutiny. U.S. officials have emphasized the importance of staying ahead of these adaptations, especially as certain networks look to exploit gaps between national jurisdictions. This has pushed Washington to expand its information sharing agreements and technical cooperation programs to enhance local monitoring capabilities. Another aspect adding complexity to the situation is Venezuela's evolving approach to its external partnerships. Government representatives in Caracas have been engaging more frequently with actors outside the Western political sphere, seeking support in areas ranging from economic restructuring to military cooperation. These engagements carry direct implications for the strategic balance of the region. When new agreements are formed, whether openly or through discrete channels, they have the potential to reshape long-standing frameworks that underpin regional security. U.S. policymakers are watching these developments closely, aware that each new partnership can shift, leverage, influence decision-making, and alter calculations across neighboring countries. Economic tensions have also intensified as Venezuela explores alternative channels for financial and trade relationships. Several international monitoring groups have reported unusual patterns in resource exports, currency movements, and offshore holdings linked to Venezuelan stakeholders. These shifts come at a time when global markets remain sensitive to fluctuations in supply and demand, particularly in sectors tied to energy, minerals, and critical commodities. Even limited adjustments in Venezuela's export behavior can create uncertainty, prompting major economies to reevaluate their exposure to short-term risks. U.S. officials are incorporating these economic indicators into their updated strategy, recognizing that financial mechanisms often reveal early signs of deeper structural changes. At the same time, humanitarian organizations operating near Venezuela's borders have highlighted increasing strain on local communities. Limited resources, overcrowded facilities, and fluctuating security conditions have stretched support systems in ways that regional governments are struggling to manage, though the U.S. remains one of the primary contributors of aid and logistical support. Officials acknowledge that long-term stability requires more than reactive humanitarian intervention. It requires a coordinated strategy that addresses the underlying drivers of displacement while ensuring that vulnerable populations are not exploited by opportunistic networks seeking profit or influence. Taken together, these factors underscore why the United States has determined that a more active, structured, and forward-leaning operational approach is necessary. Regional conditions are shifting quickly, and the intersections between economics, politics, security, and humanitarian pressures are becoming increasingly complex. A fragmented or slow response, officials warn, could allow unpredictable developments to outpace the ability of nations to manage them. This updated operational posture reflects the reality that the situation surrounding Venezuela is no longer confined to national borders but is part of a broader landscape that demands sustained attention and coordinated action. U.S. officials have emphasized that the updated operational posture is built around a framework designed to strengthen resilience across the hemisphere, with particular focus on intelligence readiness, diplomatic alignment, and strategic deterrence. This framework reflects lessons drawn from recent global events, where slow or fragmented responses left regions vulnerable to rapid shifts in political and security environments. The objective now is to maintain a level of preparedness that allows decision-makers to respond with clarity and coordination, especially as the situation around Venezuela becomes increasingly fluid. Agencies involved in the operational shift have been reviewing long-term files that detail how periods of instability in Venezuela have historically influenced broader regional dynamics. These reviews point to recurring patterns in financial volatility, migration pressure, resource misallocation, and sudden changes in political alliances. By studying these historical patterns, analysts are attempting to identify early indicators that could signal emerging complications. This effort has helped shape recent recommendations presented to policymakers, who are now acting on the understanding that waiting for a crisis to fully materialize carries risks that are significantly higher than taking proactive measures. In parallel, technical teams have begun enhancing monitoring capacities in areas that have traditionally been vulnerable to rapid destabilization. This includes maritime zones known for illicit transit, border regions with fluctuating security presence, and communication pathways used by high-level networks operating across multiple jurisdictions. Improvements in surveillance technologies and data sharing mechanisms are being implemented to reduce blind spots and streamline how information is processed between agencies. According to individuals familiar with these upgrades, the goal is to ensure that actionable intelligence reaches response teams without unnecessary delays, allowing them to evaluate situations with greater precision. Diplomatic channels remain a core component of this strategy. The United States has intensified discussions with regional leaders, not only to coordinate policy responses but also to reinforce shared expectations regarding stability and security. These conversations have taken on a broader tone, touching on energy coordination, financial transparency, governance challenges, and long-term development goals. U.S. officials understand that durable regional stability cannot rely solely on reactive measures. It requires predictable structures that allow countries to navigate sudden pressures without undermining one another. The updated operational phase acknowledges this interconnected reality and aims to support regional partners in reinforcing their internal resilience. Humanitarian agencies continue to stress that the situation on the ground remains fragile for millions who rely on external aid and support networks. The United States has been directing additional resources to assist these organizations, ensuring that vulnerable populations do not become further destabilized by shifting political or economic conditions. Officials note that when humanitarian pressures escalate, they can quickly reshape migration patterns, strain local systems, and amplify security concerns. A comprehensive strategy must therefore include attention to human welfare alongside intelligence and diplomatic components, reflecting a holistic approach to regional stability. As policymakers move forward with this expanded operational approach, the underlying message is one of vigilance. The environment surrounding Venezuela is complex, layered, and influenced by multiple external actors whose interests do not always align with regional stability. The U.S. strategy aims to reduce uncertainty by strengthening awareness, coordination, and responsiveness across all levels of engagement. This measured posture reflects the belief that regional security is not achieved through singular actions but through sustained, well-informed efforts that adapt to shifting realities and protect broader strategic interests.